there are some books that just rewire your brain, right? They install a whole new way of seeing things. Daniel Kahneman's Thinking, Fast and Slow, definitely one of those. It really blew up the idea that we think in two ways. System number one, super fast, intuitive gut feeling. Efficient mostly, but prone to big mistakes sometimes. And then system number two, slow, careful, logical. But here's the kicker. What if some of the really dramatic claims, the ones based on those foundational experiments about human error, what if scientists now look at them sideways with, well, a lot of skepticism?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Especially for a book this huge. So today, our mission isn't just to recap. We're going deep, a really thorough, rigorous critique. We'll definitely look at the power of that dual system model, no doubt. And its insights into cognitive biases are, well, revolutionary. But we also have to tackle the serious methodological backlash that's kind of shadowed its success.
Absolutely. And look, we believe some books must be challenged. It's how ideas get stronger. So this critique uses, where it makes sense, a step-by-step critical thinking framework. We're mapping claims straight to the evidence. We're also bringing in an intellectual framework, thinking about the core ideas and definitions. And we use tools like the Golden Rule and the U.S. Preamble to spot any ethical asymmetries in the arguments. It all wraps up with a logical analysis, aiming for a balanced conclusion. It's about challenging the claims properly, not just nodding along because it's popular.
Right. And for you listening, you're part of something unique here. This is a two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM. The aim is a deeper, more dynamic book critique.
Okay, so let's start with part one. Why did this book hit so hard, its lasting contribution? I mean, it really boils down to that core idea, doesn't it? System number one, system number two. It's just such a useful lens for understanding, well, ourselves, our decisions. It gave us words for that internal tug of war.
It really did. And what Kahneman did so brilliantly was bridge that gap. You had complex psychology, buried in academic journals, right?
Yeah.
He took concepts like heuristics, cognitive biases, things most people never heard of, and made them totally accessible. Used vivid examples, clear language. It wasn't just theory. It felt like he was describing our minds, a shared story.
Exactly. And those examples just stick in your head. Loss aversion, for instance. That feeling, the pain of losing something, is like twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Suddenly it made sense why we hang on to bad investments way too long, or why selling stuff feels harder than buying it.
Precisely. And the insights were so practical. Framing affects how presenting the exact same information differently changes our choices completely. Or the availability heuristic. We latch onto the most recent, most dramatic examples in our heads, even if they're not typical at all. The book gave us tools, really. Tools to question our gut feelings, to see where intuition might lead us down the wrong path.
It's undeniable the influence is massive. But, as often happens with groundbreaking work, that success invites closer scrutiny. Intense scrutiny. And that brings us to the critical part. Mapping those famous claims against today's standards for solid scientific evidence, this is where things get, well, particularly sharp. Because a psychological claim is only as strong as the data backing it up.
This is really the crux of the scientific debate now. A fair number of the experiments cited in the book, particularly those from social psychology, they face really intense questions about replicability. When we say poor replicability, we mean other scientists working independently tried running the exact same experiment. And often, they just couldn't get the same result. The original effect didn't show up.
Right, and that's huge. If you can't reliably reproduce the original data, how much confidence can you really have in the conclusion? We're not talking about minor details here, are we?
No, it goes to the foundations. When researchers started applying really rigorous methods, maybe using larger groups of people, some of those classic behavioral effects just vanished. And to his credit, Kahneman himself has been remarkably open about this. He's admitted relying too much on what scientists call underpowered studies.
Hold on, underpowered. Can you break that down for us? What does that mean in simple terms?
Sure. An underpowered study basically means the original experiment didn't include enough participants. The sample size was too small. Why does that matter? Well, with too few people, it's much easier to get a result that looks significant just by pure chance, a statistical fluke. Then, when someone comes along later and runs the study with, say, hundreds or thousands of people, that fluke effect often disappears.
Okay, got it. And you mentioned he talked specifically about the chapter on priming. That chapter was famous, showing how tiny, subtle cues could unconsciously shift our behavior.
That's the one. He expressed essentially regret about leaning so heavily on that research area. He noted that the whole phenomenon of priming is now viewed with, frankly, considerable skepticism in the scientific community. Why? those widespread replication failures. So you have this incredibly influential book that brought decision science to the masses. But some of the core evidence, the original proof for some key effects, is now considered pretty shaky by many experts.
So I have to ask the big question then. If the foundations, the actual data for some of these key examples are wobbly, does that weaken the whole theory? Does the system number one, system number two metaphor still hold value, even if some of the specific bias examples aren't as solid as we thought?
And that leads us right into part 3. Applying our intellectual framework, looking at how the book even defines rationality. Critics jump in here, arguing that the sharp line the book sometimes draws between pure reason and bias, it might be a bit too simple. They suggest that in real life, outside the lab, there are often perfectly rational reasons for behaviors that look like biases in an experiment.
That's a really deep point. Is every so-called bias automatically irrational? Maybe the lab setting itself strips away crucial context. The argument is, what looks irrational in a stripped-down artificial experiment could actually be a smart, justified move in the messy real world.
Exactly. That's the heart of the adaptive rationality perspective. Researchers pushing this idea argue that our mental shortcuts, our heuristics, didn't evolve for lab tests. They evolved for survival, for efficiency in a complex, noisy world. So something that seems like a bias in a sterile lab setting might actually be highly adaptive given real-world limits on time, information, and, frankly, brain power.
Okay, so if I use, say, the availability heuristic relying on a quick memory to make a fast judgment, maybe it's not perfectly accurate, but it's fast, it saves me mental energy, and that speed itself could be an adaptive advantage, right?
Precisely. The system might be optimized for good enough, fast enough, rather than perfectly accurate but slow. That's arguably rational when speed matters or the cost of a small error is low. The critique here is that the book's framework can sometimes imply we should always be aiming for logical perfection, which just isn't how the human mind often needs to work in context.
Which brings us to an important check within our framework. Thinking about ethical asymmetries. If we apply principles like the Golden Rule or ideas from the U.S. preamble about promoting general welfare, we have to look closely at the claim that humans are just fundamentally irrational. Some critics argue the methods used in many of these classic experiments are almost designed to make people fail. They create these artificial, sometimes tricky scenarios that kind of box people into making choices that look irrational but maybe aren't representative of how we reason normally.
Yeah, it's like setting up a situation where failure is almost guaranteed and then pointing to that failure as proof of deep, persistent human irrationality. The ethical question becomes, do these simplified experiments misrepresent our actual cognitive abilities? Do they unfairly paint the average person as inherently flawed? It's a serious point.
If this kind of deeper analysis resonates with you, getting beyond just the surface summary to the real substance of the scientific and philosophical debate, maybe take a mindful moment with us. Check out our YouTube channel. We offer AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, and these conversations all aimed at inspiring reflection and, hopefully, rational thought.
All right, moving into our logical analysis and working towards a balanced conclusion, we should probably address a structural point about the book itself, even though it's written in a really engaging way. Let's be honest, the sheer number of studies packed in there can get overwhelming, especially if you're not already steeped in psychology. It can sometimes feel like a long list of human errors, making it a bit hard to step back and see the bigger picture without some background.
That's fair. But still, you absolutely cannot discount its massive impact. Regardless of the replication debates, regardless of the arguments about adaptive rationality, this book remains profoundly influential. Its clear way of talking about cognitive processes. It fundamentally shifted fields like behavioral science, economics, even public policy. How governments and businesses think about human choice, it changed the game.
Absolutely. So our logical analysis leads us here. The book is best approached with, let's call it, measured skepticism. It's a landmark achievement, a vital piece of intellectual and cultural history, no question. But as a reader today, you have to be aware of these ongoing, quite intense debates about how general these cognitive biases really are. Do they apply everywhere or just in specific lab-like settings? Debates about the replicability of that original research, and debates about how adaptive our reasoning actually is in the real world. It's a masterpiece, yes, but one that's actively being debated, tested, and refined by science.
So, as we wrap up this critique, we want to just acknowledge something. This comprehensive look wasn't random. It employed a systematic and precise framework to really dig into the theoretical claims and the empirical evidence behind the book. Our goal, really, is to empower you, the listener, to engage with even the most celebrated ideas on the deepest level possible. Don't just accept, question, analyze, understand the nuances.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book analysis.
Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.